Hello, loud. I'm Sunday Steinkrishner. I'm the owner of B&B Rare Books here in Manhattan, and I'm also the chair of the New York Antiquarian Book Fair. So welcome today to the 3 o'clock program, Pages and Pirouettes, Literature, Dance, and Feminist Perspectives. Connor Holloway, they, them, born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, is a dancer, reader, writer, producer, and content creator. Connor moved to New York City in 2013 to dance with American Ballet Theatre, where they met Isabella Boylston, and later launched the Webby-nominated Ballerina Book Club in partnership with All Arts in 2020. Yay! Sarah Hoover holds a master's degree in cultural theory from Columbia University and a BA in art history from NYU. Her writing has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Harper's Bazaar, Psychology Today, Mother Tongue, The Strategist, and Vogue. Her debut memoir, The Motherload, is a national bestseller in Belletrist Book Club January 2025 pick. And I have read it. I have to say it's essential reading. So, welcome.
Woo-woo. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Sarah. This is my best friend, Connor. And we're really excited to talk to you about our love of books and where they intersect with ballet and history and collecting.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Connor Holloway. I literally don't know her. Just kidding. She is obsessed with me though. And yeah, we're really here because I'd say the glue that binds the pages of our friendship together.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Thanks. I just came up with it. Is really rooted in talking and geeking out about dance and writing and reading, and partly because Sarah just debuted her first book, published by Simon & Schuster in January, as mentioned by Sunday, The Motherload.
Thank you.
Yeah, so
But we're both voracious readers. While Connor is a former American Ballet Theatre superstar, they also co-founded this book club, Ballerina Book Club, with Isabella Boylston, and we just spend a lot of time talking about the books that you all are reading and what's coming up in the world of literature.
Yeah, you're really good at reading books, and I'm really good at reading people.
Exactly, yeah. With our skills combined, what can't we do? But we, I think we're both really obsessed with dance, and though I cannot compete with your leg in a tight, I grew up dancing, and as a young teenager, we both kind of got into collecting through collecting dance paraphernalia.
Yes.
Which is something we talked about. Will you tell them about your point shoe obsession?
I will, but I also want to mention one other thing, because we're doing a disservice by not mentioning it, is Sarah has really gotten me interested in history, and specifically in art history, and I think so much of collecting in antiques is being in touch with history. Sarah, you have an amazing background in working in the art world and the gallery world for 15 plus years, which is astounding considering you just turned 21 last
I know, the
month.
math makes no sense, but
Yeah.
Thank you for acknowledging that.
Yeah, but collecting point shoes. So I grew up in Kentucky, as mentioned, which is a small town and maybe not considered a ballet town, but we do have sort of a hometown hero in dance who is Wendy Whalen. And Wendy Whalen was a prima ballerina with the New York City Ballet. She was one of the last dancers to dance with George Balanchine, who is the founder of New York City Ballet. She also is now the associate artistic director of New York City Ballet. And I really call her my ballet fairy godmother for a few reasons. And I will say one of the first pieces of ballet paraphernalia that I ever collected was her point shoes. This is also where my foot fetish was born. And I was probably 12 years old. She danced at the Louisville Ballet, which is where I began dancing. And it's funny the way that point shoes are sort of like a dancer's gateway into the career. Like, it's something that feels like so precious because there's something that literally is on the stage, on the dancer. And I remember getting them, and she was really the first ballerina that I knew of, because it was just sort of like a hobby for me at the time. But it was really special. You also have a piece of New York City Ballet paraphernalia, though.
Yeah, when I was young, I went to dance camp. When I was like 9 years old, I went to ballet camp. And it actually markedly changed my life because the camp that I went to is in Saratoga Springs, New York, which is the summer home of the New York City Ballet. They perform in a beautiful outdoor theater there for a few weeks in the summer. And part of my camp experience was that I got to go watch every single one of their performances for their time there. And I would stand outside the backstage door and wait for the dancers to come out like an absolute psychopath. And I have hundreds of signatures of all of the New York City ballet dancers from that summer. But the most important thing that happened to me was that I saw the ballet Glass Pieces, which was choreographed by Jerome Robin, who was a choreographer at New York City Ballet in the mid-century. And the music was by the minimalist composer Philip Glass. And I had never in my life heard music like that. I had heard Beethoven and I had heard Britney Spears, but I had never heard anything that sounded the way his music did, and that it was orchestral, it was made by instruments, but it was just totally outside of the scope of any kind of art that I had ever experienced. And Robin's choreography that I saw on stage was also totally different than the classical ballet that I had experienced or the music videos that I watched on TV. It was dance that mimicked what it looks like to be human, but it was related to ballet because the ballerinas wore point shoes, but both of those aspects of that performance made me say to myself, I have to move. And I grew up in Indiana. I grew up in the middle of nowhere. Made me say to my very close to Connor.
Like 100 miles north of me.
I said to myself, I have to grow up and live somewhere where people's brains work in the way that they make art that looks and sounds like that. Because all anyone's doing in Indiana is going to Abercrombie and Fitch at the mall. And I really like Auntie Anne's pretzels. But I think that there's something else out there that I want to experience. And I want to live in a place where people's brains work in this way, in that weird way. And that was when I decided as a kid that I wanted to move to New York and I wanted to be involved in the art world. So it was a very formative summer for me, where I spent a lot of time stalking New York City ballet dancers. And Wendy Whalen was one of them, and I saw her perform on that stage, and I still remember her prodigal son, so.
Yeah, fun fact, Wendy Whalen, I actually slid into her Facebook DMs when I was 14 years old, and I was like, hi, you don't know me, but I'm from your hometown, and I actually stand in your bar spot, and also, what ballet summer program should I go to? And she told me where to go, and I went, and I totally followed her advice, and then ended up at ABT, and I remember meeting her. We actually were speaking on a panel together, of all places. And we connected, and she was just always such a source of direction for me. One thing about this conversation, but also about dance in general, that I wanted to bring up is this idea of intersections. I think one of the reasons I loved being a dancer with ABT for so long was I felt like I was a part of a really big intersection of dance, but also of music and costuming, and there was just so much collaboration that was happening that made it so much more than just being a dancer. Are there any dance fans in the audience? Because if not, I'm so sorry. Okay,
oh, great. Okay, yay.
Okay,
I
great.
mean, something that we love about ballet, and also I'm an art historian by education, something I realized early on in college when I was first studying art history is that it's really history told through art. And I feel the same about ballet. When you go and you see a ballet, even the Nutcracker, even something perhaps as mainstream as that, it really tells the story of the atmosphere of the time in which it was made. Mm-hmm. And that's just so fascinating because, we watch ballets routinely that are 200 years old, and it's such a living way to experience what it was like to be back then.
Yeah, but I want to talk about that for a little bit because I was actually thinking this morning about the origin story of ballet and King Henry XIV. Does anybody know who he is?
I'm sure he was a really great guy.
Honestly, he was kind of a gay icon because what he did was, so if you know of him, you might also know that his nickname was the Sun King, which, you know this. Okay, do you know why he was called the Sun King? He was called the Sun King because as a young kid, he performed in all of the court dances, and one of his iconic roles at the age of 12 was playing Apollo, and so he became the Sun King. And he was also very, very obsessed with ballet and making ballet a real thing, and so he actually created what is now the Paris Opera Ballet School, and this was the first time that ballet had ever been formalized in a curriculum, and it was, to me it's really fascinating. Although there's no proof or evidence that he was gay, he did have gay siblings, Felipe being one of them, who was a duke, and he was very accepting and sort of let them live their truth and also be in his productions. He wore tights and heels and skirts and normalized it. So, not that I'm saying that he's some sort of super
Henry
ally.
Henry XIV can stay.
But he wore a wig and he looked good in it. And he really, he created the profession of ballet, which is like pretty cool because it didn't, I guess I should thank him in some ways, it didn't exist before that. It really was just in the courts, and he sort of took it out of the courts and made it into a real thing. But one thing that I did want to say that I feel like you were leading me to is that ballet at its origin was really like, it was pop music. I mean, Tchaikovsky, these composers were really commissioned to create the music that everybody was listening to. And when you think of things like the Nutcracker specifically, like another fun fact about the Nutcracker is everybody knows that music, right, by Tchaikovsky. So he was commissioned to create this ballet in Russia for the Imperial State Ballet. And he actually, when he was in France, he discovered this instrument called the celesta, which I think comes from the French word celeste, which maybe means like
Sky,
heavenly.
celestial,
Yeah,
something?
yeah.
Okay.
You speak French, not me. Oh, and also King Henry XIV invented all the positions, like first, second, fourth, fifth. But anyways, so he discovered this instrument, the celesta, which was sort of an instrument that had never been seen before, and it's actually the instrument in the Sugar Plum Fairy music. That da, 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 da. So discovered it in France. He totally gatekept it. Took it to Russia and then composed this whole
Smuggled it to Russia.
Smuggled it into Russia. Didn't want anybody to know about this instrument because he wanted to be the first to debut it, and he did. And then the Nutcracker was born. But all of this to say, this was really like what is different now from the way that ballet is created often is that it was sort of this release. It was like you had to be there to hear this like pop music. Tchaikovsky was like, I don't know, Ariana Grande, and people would come to see this intersection of dance, and a libretto was written, and the music was made, and the costumes were designed, and all of it was this like ultimate epicenter of art and culture.
It's hard to find that now because a lot of times new ballets that are made, especially full-length ones, borrow music that has already existed. You know, they're made to old pieces of Beethoven or Mozart or something. And a ballet that we really love, that is related to our simultaneous love of literature, is Wayne McGregor's Woolf Works, which commissioned a score from the contemporary composer Max Richter. But it's quite rare, I think, to find a ballet that commissions music, costume, and a libretto and combines all of those worlds. I mean, Woolf Works is based on the work of Virginia Woolf specifically, so it has its own sort of narrative, but it's based on 3 of her books.
Yeah, we were actually just geeking out because there's a lot of really cool first edition Virginia Woolf in the fair, and I had actually never seen that cover of The Waves. The book is set in 3 acts, although they don't actually call it acts, they call them like 3 parts, and each part, it's actually playing this summer at the Met Opera if anybody wants to see it, ABT. But the first part is Mrs. Dalloway, the second part, is that right? Yeah, first part is Mrs. Dalloway, second part is Orlando, and third part is The Waves. And I mean, it's one of your favorite ballets that you've seen.
It's one of my favorite ballets I've ever seen. I'm astounded by it. It weaves, Max Richter did this very well, made his own music, but also used words by Virginia Woolf and has actresses playing her, read parts of her stories, and weaves it into the music, and it's like very mesmerizing and interesting to watch. And the 3 different parts, which represent these 3 different books, are very different in character. So it's like a real 3-for-1. I mean, it's basically like watching 3 different ballets in one night.
Yeah, and they're all sort of different stylistically as well. I will say what's interesting, and I know Wayne did this, one of the literary ballets that I danced at ABT was by Kathy Marston. She did a staging of Jane Eyre, and it was really cool to work with her because she would pull really important or pivotal phrases from the story or from the dialogue in the book, and then we would create movement around it. And so even if it was sort of lost on an audience because it can come through as abstract, it was still in the mind and the body of the dancer while portraying the role, which in terms of like many times in traditional storytelling ballets, the dialogue is told through pantomime, which if you're unfamiliar with pantomime, it can seem totally foreign and lost on you, but it's still almost this direct translation of text. But now, in this more contemporary setting, it is sort of abstract in its own way, but the dancers themselves are internalizing the parts of the dialogue or the parts of the story that sometimes you may or may not pick up on.
Yeah, that old pantomime that's used in a lot of classical ballets is specific. Like, you can find a guidebook to it probably online that shows you what each motion means. But in some of these newer ballets, like in Wayne McGregor's Hoofworks, I could decode some of the motions that he had dancers do and what specific lines they related to. Like, there's a part in Orlando where the character, who sort of represents Virginia Woolf, touches her stomach and her breasts as if to talk about being barren. And it's literal in a different way. Like, it's really interesting to watch ballets like that and try and decode them yourself. You know, it's like part of the fun, I think. They're their own little jigsaw puzzles. But what got you into reading in general in the way back in the day? Do you remember?
It's so funny. I hated reading as a kid. I was like that kid who got the Spark Notes and like refused to do my summer reading list. Like, absolutely refused. And we were just talking about this with Guy, Sarah's first child, who's 7. About how, like, as a kid, I just wanted to like do nothing. I wanted to like watch TV.
Yeah, you were a
and
house
like,
cat.
Yeah, literally. Bring me snacks and let me watch Nickelodeon. So I just like didn't have the attention span for reading. But I remember when I first moved away from Kentucky, I felt interestingly like it was my only way to sort of get in touch with my like gay side because it was private and I was doing it by myself and it wasn't something that I was ready to talk about. And so when I discovered books that had narratives and characters and themes that were queer, I think it was sort of a way out for me, literally, of the closet. And I remember reading James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, and there's like so much talk of like shame, and I think coming from Kentucky and going to Catholic school, there was just like a lot of sameness that I really appreciated. And I'll never forget, this is one of my favorite book stories and really what like launched my love of reading. I was riding the 1 train home one night from Lincoln Center, and I got on, and there was a book like in the seat. Like, nobody was on the train. It was like 11:30 at night. I got on the 1 train, and there was just a book sitting on the seat. And I like flipped it over, and it was The Lost Language of Cranes by John Levitt. And I was like, this is interesting. Like, my commute's like 50 minutes to Brooklyn. Like, I'm just gonna read it. And I start reading it, and I come to find out that it really is a story of a young queer man growing up in New York. And I was like, wow, this is like, it's like this book was left here for me. Fun fact, I actually found a receipt in the book and found the owner of the book, and I messaged him on Facebook, and he was like in Chicago on Broadway, and he was like, I totally like dropped that book. I'm so glad you found it. So it was like this really interesting story of like literal queer lineage, but also reading a story about, just a queer guy growing up in New York. And so I think seeing that I could learn things about myself was something. I can't even look at you because Sarah also hates my taste in books because
I'm judgmental a little bit about...
Not the queer ones.
No, the ones about dragons. We don't have to talk about that here, though.
Yeah, no, we won't talk about Wyvern today. So that's really where my love of reading started, and then obviously I started the book club with Isabella. What about you, babe?
Well, I grew up reading all the cheesy series like Nancy Drew, Sweet Valley High. Sweet Valley High, I stand on this, fucked me up for life because the descriptions of female beauty in it are so distinctly like early 90s American. They're really stereotypical, and I remember reading them and being like, God, I really don't measure up to any of this. And sometimes when you go back and read those series that were geared towards like middle school girls, as I kind of am doing now because now my kid reads, so I have been looking at a bunch of old books that I read when I was his age. They're really fucked up. Like, the culture that we were all absorbing at that time was, it's pretty negative from my vantage point today. But my world changed when I read A Tree Grows in Brooklyn and The Bell Jar, which came to me pretty early. And I remember reading both of those books and imagining a life for myself somewhere else. And they both capture in their own way what it feels like to be young and finding yourself and having the luxury of being in a city where you can be anonymous and you can look at so many different kinds of people and imagine becoming one of them or becoming a mix of them, which is not really something that is afforded to you when you grow up somewhere really small, because tastes are more homogenous and also because you know everybody. And I remember reading particularly the bell jar in the first half when she's experiencing New York for the first time as like a, teenager, and wanting to have that experience for myself so much, and wanting to be somewhere where you could write your own story. And those books were just like incredibly propulsive and moving for me. And I don't remember reading The Bell Jar and being like spooked at all by the mental illness aspects of it. I remember reading it and thinking to myself, of course this woman's insane. Like, when I look back and read it now, I reread it yearly at least. Her interactions with men in particular are so rapey by our standards now. And I don't know if when she was writing it, she felt this way, but the trajectory of it makes so much sense to me. Like, of course, the second part is from the halls of a mental institution. The first part, there are like at least 2 scenes that I'm pretty sure are her getting raped, and it's coded, by language of the time. And I remember it just really like made sense to me that she was dealing with the side effects of what it meant to be a woman and living in contemporary society and trying to participate in it by herself.
So Sarah has been on her book tour. Her book came out in January, and I've gotten to witness you be interviewed many times, but I actually haven't gotten to interview you at all. And just hearing you say that, one thing is I never cared much for history. I did like collecting things because they felt like I was like owning either a piece of someone's story or an artist's process. But I will say, Sarah, you, as my friend, have really gotten me interested in history, and you actually just said it briefly in the beginning of how art history specifically was the way of learning about history through the artists and really the people and civilians of the time and what they were experiencing. And it's one thing to open a history book and read about, a war happened, or there was a ruler that was bad, but to actually look at the work and absorb the work of the people that were living in that environment is almost the most honest portrayal of what it was really like for the people that were existing in that time. And it's interesting because I feel like Sylvia Plath was a huge inspiration for you, but she wrote very honestly about the female experience at the time of being in New York and working in publishing and her interactions with men. And I'm just curious what you think. So Sarah, I don't want to speak for your book, but it is really about a woman's experience, a new mother's experience in the world at the time that we live in. So it only makes me think 20, 30, 40 years from now, people will read this book and be like, wow, that's what it was really, really like at the time. And do you think at all about, I don't really know what the question is in this, but like how in many ways, like your book is a work of art that is expressing what it is like at this time?
That's giving me a lot of credit. I don't know if my book's a work of art. What I know about it, and Sylvia Plath wrote fiction, though thinly veiled. My book is memoir, but what I know is that every book that has changed the way that I look at the world traffics in truth in a way that is really profound. And the writer, whoever he or she may be, like, doesn't care about judgment. And the importance seems to be on just writing the emotional truth of what they were experiencing at that time. And that's something that was really important to me to do, because like, I have no idea if I'm good at writing. I don't even really care. What I care about is that I wrote down everything I could share about my own experience in the hope that it would connect other people to their own experiences and give them some modicum of freedom of being able to talk about what their life is like out loud, because it's the only way that has ever made me feel like a whole person, is to not feel shame about, like, my life is my life. I can't, unfortunately, there's only so much of that you can change, and I feel like just owning that truth and putting it on paper and not being afraid of it has brought me so much more solace than any amount of like shame or pretending or acting ever has. And that was what was important to me about writing my book. And I know for a fact that it was important for Sylvia Plath, even though her book is fiction, because she said so many things that were absolutely unsayable then. To write about being in a mental institution, to write about the depths of, the darkest parts of her existence, to write about her experiences with men. Like, I think we've all read enough books from the 50s and 60s to know that there aren't a lot of women who are like boldly doing what she did. It's literature that endures, I think, relies on that level of truth-telling. So I don't know if my book's art or not, but that was very important to me.
Yeah, all I'm saying is you're part of a legacy of truth-telling.
Thank you.
But speaking of Sylvia Plath and women writers, Sunday, we do want to invite you back up because Sunday actually owns some very, very unique and special pieces of Sylvia Plath's legacy, which we have not asked the questions yet because Sarah and I want to have really real reactions to the stories of these pieces.
Specifically one piece
that might contain some DNA of Sylvia Plath. And we're actually going to get the Ouija board out and talk to her in a minute. But before we do that, will you tell us a little bit, Sunday, about your love of Sylvia Plath, also Virginia Woolf, if you'd like, because I know you also have pieces of hers, and how you began your collection.
Yes, absolutely. And it's funny, too, because everything you guys have been talking about, there's so many connections here. And my role into everyone's like, how did you become a bookseller? And I said, very accidentally. So I also grew up in a very small town, south of Buffalo, New York. And I knew I wanted to be someplace bigger and better. I wanted to be in New York. So I came here in 2003. And I went to NYU for counseling psychology for a master's degree. So I thought that's what I was going to do with my life. And I did do that for a little while. But early on, I always say that New York makes you hustle because I didn't have any money when I moved here. And I woke up one day and there was a little street sale. People were selling books, CDs, things from their apartments. And I picked up an old edition of Alice in Wonderland and I felt like I got struck with lightning. It was an old edition. It actually wasn't very valuable, which I found out, but it was just the idea of oh my gosh, I wonder if people collect books because I didn't know that. Had I known that people collect books and that people could be booksellers as a career, I would have said, I want to be a bookseller when I grow up. But I didn't know that until I picked up that book and I found it. So I started selling books on eBay, and I met a lot of people that way. Started becoming sort of a scout for books. People were saying, oh, I'm looking for this, I'm looking for that. And I was here in New York, and I was going to estate sales, buying books for $1. But eventually kind of built up, some clientele and some real books, which was really nice. So that's how I became a bookseller, and then became a Woolf specialist. People are like, why didn't you sell books about psychology? That's what you studied formally. Yes, it is, but when I was thinking about what I wanted to really sell, it was just what spoke to me personally. And Virginia Woolf is always one of my favorite authors. So I started buying and selling her works, and that's been really fun. I'm glad you mentioned Orlando, because I have a signed copy of Orlando. So it was published in 1928. This is one of 800 copies. She signed all of them, and she's signing in her signature purple ink. So it's very special to have something signed by an author because it's more unique that way. Books as works of art, I think, it's more fun when there's something like that that's really unique.
That's beautiful, and am I allowed to touch this?
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely.
But we have to talk about the hair.
We do.
Okay. I have so many questions.
Okay.
So you have Sylvia Plath's hair.
I do.
Have you sniffed it?
I've
Does
touched it
smell
for
like
sure.
her shampoo?
This is Sylvia Plath's hair. And I was telling them ahead of time, I was not trying to involve myself in the programs. I curate the programs and I run the book fair. I wasn't trying to involve myself, but you guys were mentioning the direction you were going with the program, and I was like, oh my gosh, well, I specialize in Woolf, maybe I've got some cool things. They're like, yes, join. And then you mentioned, oh, maybe there's someone else in the room that has Sylvia Plath, and I'm like, oh gosh.
That's also me.
Well, yes, that's also me.
Yeah, when you mentioned the hair, we were like, can Sarah wear the hair? Can we, how can we spotlight the hair?
Yes. So how did I get the hair? So the description of the hair is formally, first cutting of the poet's hair, 22 May, 1935. A generous bob of blonde hair preserved in the wax envelope, approximately 7.5 by 10 centimeters, of the children's hairdressing shop, Jordan Marsh Company, with details filled in ink by Aurelia Plath. Name, Sylvia Plath. Age, 2.5 years. First cutting, yes, 5/22/35. So,
I am gooped. What?
And Aurelia's her mom.
yes,
So
Aurelia's her
took
mom. So I became an ABA member in 2009. So 2010 was my first ABA book fair, and it was the California Book Fair, the last time it was in LA proper. And it was my first ABAA fair. I was a new member. I was so excited. And I was going around meeting all the dealers. And there was a dealer named Rick Jakosky, and someone worked for him named Peter Grogan. And I had followed him for a long time because I was looking at his catalogs, and he specialized in Woolf and the Bloomsbury group. And because they were in London, they always get amazing material, stuff that's harder to get over here. So I wanted to introduce myself, and we started talking, and we were like, I was showing him my books, and he was showing me his. And then he's like, I have Sylvia Plath's hair. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what do you mean you have it? So it was in an envelope, and I was just gobsmacked. I couldn't believe it. It was weird and creepy, but I was like, oh my God, like this is a piece of her. Like this isn't just like a page that was signed. This is part of her DNA. And Peter, who's a good friend, just now, said, well, why don't you just take some? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you're selling it. The price was 2,500 pounds. So I'm like, I'm not gonna take some. He's like, just take some. Just if you can find an envelope somewhere around, just take a little chunk. I couldn't believe this. So I ran around trying to find an envelope. I found one at the ABA table. So Susan Benny, our executive director, was kind enough to give me an envelope, which is the same envelope I still have it in, actually. So I ran around trying to find it. This is the ABA envelope that I put the hair in. And I said, Peter, what can I do to thank you for this? Because I don't know what to do. Like, I'm not giving any money. Like, you want me to pay part of the 2,500 pounds? Like, what should I do? And he said 2 things. Promise me you're not going to do anything weird with the DNA, like clone her. I said, okay. And he said, buy me a beer. So I did.
That's a great trade. And we don't have to clone her. But it is, so where do you keep it?
I keep it in that little portfolio in my office. And I don't usually get it out. Usually when I explain to people that I have it, like they're like, really? And no one really wants to see it, but I show it to them anyway.
Oh, we wanted to see it. We had a lot of questions.
I wanted to pet it.
Yes.
That's so cool. And you also have this photograph of the crawl space in which Sylvia Plath was found after her first suicide attempt, right?
Yes, I do. So
Your collection, I'm just saying.
It's a little creepy. It's a little weird.
Just
I know.
a little morbid.
That's true. Yeah, so this came to me by way of a man named Richard Larshan. He's a professor of English. He lived near Wellesley, Massachusetts, where the Plaths lived. And he lived down the street from Aurelia. And basically, she had not cleaned out the house after Sylvia moved to London. And then after Sylvia died, everything just stayed there. And she was a pack rat, and she kept everything. She kept all of Sylvia's stories when she was published in magazines, all of her books, the books that inspired her, the books that she read. And Aurelia did not want to really go through this stuff, so she asked her neighbor, Richard, to help go through the material. And basically, as a thank you for helping her do that, she gifted him a bunch of material, and then this person found us, and then we ended up selling it to us, and then we sold it to Emory University. So that's where it is now. So sometime during the time when he was going through all this stuff, I guess Aurelia was like, do you want to see the place where we found Sylvia? Because she was missing for 2 days. The first time she tried to commit suicide, she had taken a number of pills. I think her mother had gone out for, like, to go to a movie or something, and Sylvia left a note saying, like, I went for a walk, and then no one could find her for 2 days, but this was the crawl space in the house. So basically, they say it's the porch or the basement, so it must be kind of both. But really, yes, she kind of, I guess she took a whole bunch of sleeping pills and then crawled under here, and then they found her. Thank God they found her 2 days later. But this was like her early attempt, and then that was it became part of the bell jar. So
Exactly.
It's a really unglamorous place to go.
Yes.
I mean, you all have to look at the photo, but it is not, yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing these items. Yes. I've never seen such a morbid collection.
Thank you. I think.
So cool.
I didn't start out saying I want to.
You did say that your first was Alice in Wonderland, which is much. Yeah.
Yes. No, that was definitely like the first love, and so yeah, that's not that weird.
Does anyone have questions about Sunday's collection or anything else for us?
Oh, Adam.
This was so fab. Connor and Sarah, so much, I know you both, but it was so much fun to learn more about your relationship and the glue that binds you together. And at the intersection of dance and literature, I was wondering if you could maybe share some like titles or some copies if someone's interested in that intersection, like what's sort of like the 101, like if James Baldwin and Giovanni's Room is like queer lit 101, what is like dance lit 101? And also, Sarah, I'd be really interested in if there are any dance kids books that you got for your kids. My nieces too, so like any
So
range.
sweet.
Yeah.
A lot of books that I read when I was younger are memoirs of ballerinas. And I have to say, like, few of them are particularly literary, but like Kelsey Kirkland's wrote 2 books. Dancing on My Grave is the most famous one.
Tony Bennett's The Surrender is very salacious.
And interesting, and she also...
It's like an exotic memoir, if you've ever heard of such a thing.
Yeah, correct. Erotic.
Erotic, that's what it is.
And
Sorry.
She also wrote a book specifically about the Balanchine Ballet Serenade, which is very beautiful. And then there's an incredible memoir by an author named John Haskell that is about the loss of his child, but told through the history of, I think, 4 of the major historical ballets. It's incredible. And that would be my, like, if I were to give you one very literary one for you to read, it would be that one.
Okay, but for small children, I actually helped ABT do a series with Penguin Random House of kids' books that are inspired by ABT ballets and dancers. The first one's B is for Ballet. It's an alphabet book. It's by John Robert Ullman. It's great. There's also Boys Dance, which if you buy, there is a picture of me in the back. But I helped the illustrator like get all of the depictions correct and the positions of the feet and everything. And then there's another one called My Daddy Can Fly, which is told through the eyes of like a young boy who, I think it's like show and tell week, and his dad is a professional ballet dancer, and it's based on Thomas Forster, who's a principal dancer with ABT. But those are really good. It's a collection of 3, and the illustrations are great. B is for Ballet, Boys Dance, and My Daddy Can Fly.
Anybody else?
So thank you so much, and I have questions for both of you. So I love reading and I love ballet, but I'm not a professional in art history or in ballet. And for me, as an amateur, I always have this question of how do you select things that are actually, like worthy of your time and would help you develop? Because I think there are so many things that are claimed to be fancy, but it might not be like, the actual art piece or a real part that you should spend your time on reading about art history. But at the same time, I feel that if you also go in another direction where it's super rare and you try to go for super rare things in ballet or in art history, you can also pick up something that is also, once again, not as good for an amateur. So how would you advise people like me to navigate these things to actually get more educated, but at the same time not to, do a lot of missteps?
I think I know what you're talking about by fancy. Like, I hate art history that uses words that are too big, that are unnecessarily big. I feel like it's actually really exclusionary and like just serves to make people feel stupid so that the writer feels smart, and that's bullshit, right? That's like all ego-based. I will make you a list of my art history books that matter. The best one is Calvin Tompkins' Lives of the Artists. If you read that, you will know so much more about the art world, and also Sarah Thornton's book, which I think is called 5 Days in the Art World, but Thornton is her last name. Those are 2 like just great, anyone can read them and understand them, and they don't have like performatively fancy language, which I abhor myself and think is really rude actually and disrespectful to the reader at any level, professional or not. Using simple, respectful language is the best way to get any idea across, and I agree with you on that. When it comes to dance, like, do you mean
Like
how
class?
to go see dance that is not
Or to like take class.
to see dance? Well, you are so fortunate that you live in New York City because you have the best dance, I think, probably, easily of any American city, but the widest range.
I feel like one of my favorites that's very approachable is New York City Center does a program called Fall for Dance every fall. And what it is I think all the tickets are $15. Yeah, 15. And every night they program it, so there's usually 3 to 4 pieces, and each one is a different genre of dance. So like you could have ballet, you could have tap, you could have hip hop, and then you could have like Indian folk dancing. Like it spans
Like
the world.
so many genres.
And the dancers travel from all over the world to come and perform, and it does sell quickly, but if you like mark your calendar, like it doesn't sell out immediately. It's like usually 2 weeks of programming. So that I feel like is a great entry because it's not expensive, and you will always, I usually go for 1 or 2 pieces, but then I'm surprised by the other 2 that are on the program.
And I just cannot emphasize enough how good Wolfworks is, which is coming to the Met Opera June 17th by ABT. Like, see if you can get any ticket in the last ring of the 3rd mezzanine. Doesn't matter. It's so wonderful.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite ballets I've seen in 10 years. But it's very hard to decide for yourself what is worthy of spending money on. And like, I have had a hard time trusting critics at the big papers and magazines because I think they traffic in the same sort of pretentious bullshit too. So I don't know, follow us on Instagram.
We'll tell you what's good.
Anybody else? Oh, thank you.
Hi, big fan of both of you. More of a comment. I feel like it's been glossed over a bit in the interviews and since the book has been published. How much, in order for you to evolve, your partner had to evolve. And I think that really could have helped Sylvia as well. And I wonder if you had any comments on that.
Wait, was the last part of that sentence for Sylvia? As well?
I think it could have helped her as well.
Oh,
I
well,
think-
yeah. Had Ted Hughes at all evolved as a human, it could have helped her for sure. I feel very fortunate because I have a life partner who like listens and has a large capacity for change. And while he failed me in the year after I had a child and was everywhere from useless to hateable, he also was open-minded and open-eared and willing to analyze his own behavior and take a good hard look in a mirror and become a better person for me and for our family. And I just can't ask for anything more out of any adult on this earth than the willingness to be self-critical and to hold up a mirror and really take a hard look and be willing to make concerted effort towards becoming a better person. And it went both ways too. He asked me to do the same thing, and none of us are perfect. I think like being in a partnership with someone who's open to doing that is incredible. It makes me feel very stable and like very safe. And it's deeply important to me, and it allowed us not only to be together, but for our relationship to improve. And it gave me the space to really work on my mental health and to become like a much better version of me. And I actually like can't imagine what it is like for someone like Sylvia Plath, whose husband was physically abusive, she just had the short end of the stick in every way. I don't know how you become yourself in conditions like that, because it takes a like vast energy. You need so much energy to be creative. It's a drain in its own way. It's really, I think, very hard to do, to spend your life generating art like at the level that she did, and having to manage his ass as well, I think is like such a huge disservice. I mean, the fact that she wrote the poetry that she wrote and wrote books like the Bell Jar is in spite of his existence, and I can't imagine what she could have created if she hadn't had to deal with him. But it's hard to be in partnership with one person, and especially if you're like trying to make art and live your full identity with them. I don't think it's possible to do with someone who isn't willing to like really listen to you and hear you and be committed to changing for you if you call them out on stuff that's real. I don't know if that answers your question, but like, yeah, I let him stay, and I show him my boobs annually because he got his shit together and listened to me. Anybody else? Great, well, thank you so much. So
Thank
nice
you.
to see all of you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here. And thank you, Sunday.
Oh my God, thank you for
Thank
sharing.
you. Oh, thank you guys. I appreciate it.